Hello listener, if you're hearing this, your lungs are still pulling air. If you're new here, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. This story is different from the others. This isn't about climbing into a fortress and sealing the doors. This is about choosing the highest point you can find and discovering that elevation doesn't equal escape. That seeing everything doesn't mean controlling anything. That sometimes the loneliest death happens in a glass box with $1 million view. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and before the world caught fire and died screaming, I was a wildfire lookout for the United States Forest Service, stationed at Desolation Peak in the North Cascade Mountains of Washington State. My job was simple: sit in a small glass cabin at 10,247 feet elevation and watch for smoke. That's it, just watch. Scan the horizon from dawn to dusk during fire season, note any smoke columns, radio in the coordinates, and let the professionals handle the rest. It was a job that required patience, solitude, and a genuine love of being completely alone for months at a time. Most people don't even know this job still exists. They assume satellites and drone technology have replaced human fire spotters, and in a lot of places, they have. But in remote wilderness areas, especially the North Cascades where weather patterns shift minute by minute and terrain creates 1,000 microclimate, nothing beats a trained human eye at high elevation with good optics and intimate knowledge of the landscape. I could tell the difference between morning mist and smoke at 20 miles, could read weather systems 3 days out just by watching cloud formations, could identify lightning strike locations by counting seconds between flash and thunder and triangulating against known peaks. I'd been doing this work for 6 seasons, started when I was 26, fresh out of a bad relationship and a worse job in Seattle, looking for anything that would put distance between me and the life I was failing at. Found a posting for fire lookout positions, applied on a whim, got hired, and discovered I was weirdly perfect for it. Most people lasted maybe 1 season before the isolation drove them back to civilization. They'd sit in that 14 by 14 foot glass box for a week and start going stir crazy. The silence got to them, the lack of human contact, the profound, crushing weight of being the only person for miles in every direction. But I loved it, genuinely loved it. Loved waking up above the clouds with the sunrise painting the glaciers pink and gold. Loved the complete silence broken only by wind and the occasional raven. Loved the profound sense of being part of something larger than myself, the forest, the mountains, the ancient cycles of growth and fire and regrowth that had been happening here for thousands of years before humans showed up with their roads and their opinions. Desolation Peak Lookout was one of the most remote postings in the entire North Cascades system. The access trail was 8 miles long, starting at a road that was itself 40 miles from the nearest town. The trail gained 4,400 feet of elevation over those 8 miles, switchbacking up steep mountainsides, crossing avalanche chutes, traversing narrow ridges with 1,000-foot drops on either side. Most day hikers turned back after the first 2 miles. Even experienced backpackers found it challenging, but I'd done it so many times, I could practically hike it with my eyes closed. The lookout itself was a beautiful piece of 1930s Forest Service architecture, a small wooden platform mounted on corner posts, with a 14-foot square cabin sitting on top. All 4 walls were windows floor-to-ceiling glass that gave me 360-degree visibility across the North Cascades. The ceiling was glass too, letting me track weather systems directly overhead. In the center of the room sat the Osborne firefighter, a circular metal device with sighting arms that let me pinpoint the exact coordinates of any smoke I spotted. My living space consisted of a narrow cot along one wall, a small table, a propane camp stove, and shelves for supplies. Underneath the platform was storage for the bulk of my gear: 50-pound bags of supplies, water containers, tools, emergency equipment. The view from Desolation Peak was genuinely one of the best in the lower 48 states. On clear days, I could see Mount Baker 50 miles to the west, its glaciated peak dominating the horizon. To the north, the Pasayten Wilderness stretched into Canada, endless ridges of forest and stone. East was the Columbia Plateau, and south was layer after layer of Cascade Peaks fading into blue distance. I had a high-quality pair of binoculars and a spotting scope, and I'd spend hours just scanning the landscape, learning every ridge and valley, every drainage and saddle, until I could navigate the entire visible region by memory. My season typically ran from mid-June through mid-September, the 4 months when wildfire risk was highest in the Pacific Northwest. I'd hike in with about 60 pounds of supplies on my back: fruit, propane, batteries, books, everything I'd need for a week. Then every 7 to 10 days, I'd hike back down to a cache point halfway down the trail where the Forest Service would drop additional supplies. It was a good system, kept me provisioned without requiring constant resupply flights, which were expensive and weather dependent. The 2024 season started exactly like the 5 before it. I drove to the trailhead on June 14th, parked my truck in the small gravel lot, and shouldered my pack. The weight settled familiar across my hips and shoulders. I'd done this hike 23 times before. This would be number 24. The first 2 miles were relatively gentle, winding through old-growth forest where the canopy blocked out the sun and the air smelled like moss and decay. Then the trail started climbing in earnest. Switchbacks cut across an open slope where avalanches had cleared the big trees, leaving only low brush and wildflowers. The sun was brutal here, no shade, just exposed trail, gaining elevation fast. My legs burned, my lungs worked hard in the thinning air. But I was in good shape from hiking and a winter of cross-country skiing, so I made steady progress. Mile 4 was where most people turned back. The trail traversed a narrow ridge with serious exposure on both sides. To the left, a 1,000-foot drop into a rocky basin. To the right, an even steeper drop into a different drainage. The trail itself was maybe 2 feet wide, carved into crumbling rock, with nothing but empty air on either side. I'd seen grown men take one look at that traverse and nope, right back down the mountain, but I'd crossed it so many times it barely registered. Just kept my eyes forward, maintained my rhythm, and trusted my boots. Mile 6 brought me above. Now the landscape was alpine low shrubs, scattered wildflowers, lichen-covered rock. The air was noticeably thinner. My breath came harder. The sun was intense at this elevation, even though the temperature was only in the 60s. Mile 7 was a brutal climb up, a scree slope where every step slid back half a step. This was a section I hated most. No rhythm, no flow, just grinding uphill through loose rock that shifted under your boots and threatened to send you sliding back down. But finally, Mile 8, the trail crested the final ridge, and there it was. Desolation Peak Lookout. The small wooden platform and glass cabin perched on the very summit, surrounded by nothing but sky and distant mountains. I'd made it. Another season beginning. I climbed the final 100 yards to the lookout, dropped my pack on the platform, and just stood there for a moment, breathing hard, taking in the view. God, I'd missed this. The profound silence, the sense of being on top of the world, the complete absence of human noise. But mostly, I heard silence. Frequencies that should have been busy with traffic were just dead air. On day 9, I saw something that made my chest tighten. I was doing my afternoon scan with the binoculars, checking the valley far below where the access road came in. There were vehicles on that road, a lot of them, and they weren't moving in organized traffic patterns. They were scattered, parked at odd angles, some in the ditch, some blocking the road. I couldn't see people from this distance too far, too much haze, but the vehicle positions told a story. Panic, flight, abandonment, and that night, for the first time, I saw fires that weren't wildfires, town fires, structure fires. Far to the south, maybe 50 miles away, I could see orange glows that were definitely buildings burning. Multiple points of light that grew and spread over the course of the evening. Nobody was putting those fires out. Nobody was responding. Day 11. I tried to call for help one more time, picked up the radio and broadcast on the emergency frequency. This is Sarah Mitchell at Desolation Peak Fire Lookout. If anyone is receiving this, I'm requesting information on the situation. I've been out of contact with my station for 4 days. I'm at elevation 10,247 feet in the North Cascades. I have supplies and I'm safe, but I need to know what's happening. Please respond if you can hear me. I waited, counted to 60. Nothing. This is Desolation Peak. Is anyone out there? Anyone at all? Silence. I put down the radio and accepted the truth. Whatever had happened down there, I was on my own. Nobody was coming to update me. Nobody was sending instructions. The chain of command had collapsed. I was the only person for miles, maybe the only person for a lot of miles, and I had to figure out how to survive without any support. Day 15. I saw my first confirmed sighting of what I'd started thinking of as them, the infected, the things that had caused all this. I was scanning with a spotting scope, checking the trailhead parking lot 8 miles away and 4,400 feet below me. There were maybe a dozen vehicles there now, all parked in random positions, and figures moving between them. At first, I thought they were survivors, people who'd fled to the wilderness, maybe thinking the same thing I had: get away from population centers, get to high ground. But their movement was wrong, jerky, aimless. They weren't searching the vehicles with purpose. They were just wandering, moving in circles, occasionally stopping to pound on a car window for no apparent reason. I watched one figure for a full 5 minutes. It walked from one car to another, touched the hood, turned around, walked back to the first car, touched it again, turned around, same pattern, over and over, like a broken machine stuck in a loop. That's when I understood that whatever this was, it wasn't just societal collapse or panic or infrastructure failure. This was something biological, something that broke human minds and bodies and turned them into that, and they were 8 miles away. On the only trail that led to my sanctuary, I went back into the cabin, closed the door, and sat on my cot with my head in my hands. 8 miles and 4,400 feet of vertical gain, that was the barrier between me and them. It should be enough. They couldn't coordinate an 8-mile mountain hike. They probably couldn't even find the trail. Probably, but I remembered watching that figure loop between the cars. Mindless, but persistent. What if they just started walking? What if they wandered onto the trail by accident and just kept going, kept climbing, kept following the path upward? What if they made it here? Day 20, I came up with a plan. If they were coming, I needed to know well in advance. The trail had several good vantage points where I could see hikers from miles away. I'd keep the spotting scope trained on those points during daylight hours. Any movement, any figures on the trail, I'd see them long before they reached the lookout. And if they came, what then? The lookout had a solid door I could lock, but the walls were glass. If they were aggressive, they could break through. The platform was wooden, 30 feet off the ground on corner posts. But if there were enough of them, they could probably tear it down. My weapons inventory was pathetic. A small folding knife, a hatchet for splitting kindling. That was it. I wasn't a gun person, had never felt the need to carry one in the wilderness. Now I desperately wished I'd brought even a .22 rifle. I spent that afternoon reinforcing the door with a length of 2x4 I found in the storage area under the platform. Wedged it against the door at an angle so it couldn't be pushed open from outside. It wouldn't stop a determined human with tools, but it might stop mindless infected. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing sounds that might be footsteps on the trail. Kept seeing movement in the shadows that wasn't there. My brain was filling in threats, creating danger from the darkness. This was going to be a problem. I'd done 6 seasons of solo lookout work. I knew how isolation could play tricks on your mind. Phantom sounds, imagined movements. The brain doesn't like sensory deprivation, so it manufactures stimuli. But now those phantom sounds might be real threat, and I had no way to tell the difference. Day 25, the first wildfire started. I spotted the smoke column at 0945, about 38 miles to the southeast. Thin and white initially, rising from what I identified as a drainage on the northeast face of Crater Mountain. Lightning strike, most likely. We'd had a thunderstorm roll through 2 nights ago. Normal procedure would be to call it in immediately, give exact coordinates, wait for confirmation that fire crews were being dispatched, track the smoke and provide updates. But there were no fire crews anymore. Nobody to call. Nobody coming. I watched the smoke column grow over the course of the day. By evening, it was thick and dark, maybe 100 acres involved. A campfire that had grown into something serious. And I could do nothing, just watch, just document, just count the acres as they burned. That night, I saw the glow. Orange light flickering against the low clouds, visible even from 40 miles away. The fire had grown, was burning hot, would continue burning until weather or terrain stopped it. This was going to happen all summer. Lightning strikes with nobody to respond. Small fires growing into big ones. The entire forest ecosystem entering an uncontrolled fire cycle. And I was going to watch it all happen from my glass box, completely powerless to intervene. Day 30, 3 people appeared on the trail. I'd been scanning the lower sections of the trail every hour, and at 11:30 I spotted them. 3 figures, maybe 4 miles down, climbing steadily. They had backpacks. Were moving with purpose, not the aimless wandering of the infected. Survivors, actual living people, heading for the lookout. My first emotional response was relief, company, human contact, people to share this nightmare with. My second response, coming about 30 seconds later, was fear. Who were these people? Were they sick? Were they dangerous? Were they going to try to take my supplies, my space? I tracked them through the spotting scope as they climbed. 2 men and a woman, all appearing to be in their 30s or 40s. Reasonable pace, taking breaks at the standard rest points. They knew what they were doing. They were maybe 2 hours from reaching the lookout. I had to make a decision. Let them come up, or turn them away. The lookout was 14 by 14 feet. With 3 more people, it would be crowded. My supplies would last maybe a month split 4 ways instead of the 3 months I had for myself. We'd be on top of each other constantly. No privacy, no space. And I didn't know them. Didn't know if they were friendly or hostile. Didn't know if they were infected or carrying something that would infect me. The voice in my head that sounded like my mother said, "These are people, Sarah. Human beings who need help. You can't just turn them away." The voice that sounded like 6 seasons of solitude said, "This is your space. Your supplies, your survival. Letting them up here risks everything." I watched them climb closer. 1 hour away now. They'd be able to see the lookout soon. I made my choice. I stepped out onto the catwalk so they could see me, waited until they were close enough to hear, maybe a quarter mile away, and cupped my hands around my mouth. "Stop there. The lookout is full. No room for more people." They stopped, looked up at me. The woman shouted back, "Please, we've been hiking for 3 days. We need somewhere safe. I don't have space. My supplies won't support more people." One of the men, "We have our own supplies. We just need shelter." "No, I'm sorry. You need to turn back." They consulted with each other. I could see the body language even from this distance. Frustration, anger, but also exhaustion. They were at the end of their rope. The woman tried once more. "We're not infected. We haven't seen anyone in days. Please. There's a cabin at Copper Ridge, 6 miles southeast. Follow the ridge trail. You can shelter there." It was a lie. There was no cabin at Copper Ridge, but I needed them gone. They argued amongst themselves for another 5 minutes. Then, finally, they turned around, started back down the trail. I watched them descend until they were out of sight. Then I went back inside the lookout and sat on my cot and stared at my hands. I'd just sent 3 people back into the wilderness with false information. They'd waste hours, maybe days, looking for a shelter that didn't exist. They might die because of me, but I was safe. My supplies were secure. My space was my own. I told myself it was the right choice. The only choice. Survival wasn't about being nice. It was about making hard decisions. But that night, I dreamed about the woman's voice, calling up to me, pleading, "Please." I woke up at 03:00 with my heart pounding and couldn't get back to sleep. Day 35, a second fire started. Then a third, on day then a fourth, on day The North Cascades were burning. Every day brought new smoke columns on the horizon. Some were small, maybe 10 or 20 acres, and they'd burn out quickly when they hit rock or a creek. Others were massive, growing into 1,000-acre complexes that generated their own weather systems. I documented everything in my log: location, size, direction of spread, professional habit from 6 seasons of Firewatch. But there was nobody to share the information with. It was just data disappearing into the void. By day 40, smoke had become a permanent feature of the landscape. The crystal-clear mountain views I loved were gone. Most days, visibility was down to 15 or 20 miles. The air had a constant haze. The sunsets were spectacular brilliant oranges and reds that painted the smoke layers, but they came at the cost of breathable air. I started coughing, just a little, at first. Throat irritation from the smoke particles, but it got worse. By day 45, I was coughing hard enough to wake myself up at night. My chest felt tight. My eyes burned constantly. Smoke inhalation was cumulative. Long-term exposure caused permanent lung damage. I knew this, but what could I do? I couldn't leave. I couldn't seal the lookout completely. I needed ventilation or I'd suffocate from CO2 buildup. I just had to breathe the smoke and hope I didn't develop something serious. Day 50, my food situation became critical. I'd brought supplies for roughly 90 days, but I'd been rationing carefully, stretching everything as far as possible. 1 meal per day, small portions, supplementing with anything I could forage from the immediate area around the lookout: wild berries, the occasional grouse, small trout from the creek. But even with careful rationing, the math was clear. I had maybe 40 days of food left. After that, I'd be completely dependent on what I could hunt and gather, and the Alpine environment around Desolation Peak didn't offer much. This close to the limit of where trees would grow, there wasn't abundant wildlife or edible plants. I started thinking about descending, hiking back to the trailhead, finding a vehicle that worked, trying to reach a town that might still have supplies. But every time I looked at the trail through my spotting scope, I saw them. More of the infected had found the trailhead parking lot. They clustered around the vehicles, wandering in their broken machine patterns. And sometimes, one would wander onto the trail, start hiking upward, not purposefully, just following the path because it was there. So far, none had made it more than a mile before wandering off the trail or stopping to stand in place for hours. but they were there. Between me and any escape route, I was trapped, not by locked doors, but by terrain and infected and diminishing supplies. Day 60. The smoke got so thick I couldn't see more than a mile. A massive fire complex to the west had generated a smoke column that reached 40,000 feet. Winds pushed that smoke directly over Desolation Peak. For 3 days, I couldn't see the ground, just gray haze in every direction. The air quality was genuinely dangerous now. Every breath. I fashioned a makeshift respirator from a t-shirt and activated charcoal from my water filter, but it barely helped. I spent those 3 days lying on my cot with a wet cloth over my face, moving as little as possible to conserve oxygen, coughing up black phlegm and wondering if this was how I died, not from infection or violence, but from smoke inhalation in a glass box while watching the forest burn. On day 63, the wind shifted. The smoke cleared enough to see again. I stepped outside onto the catwalk and looked at the transformed landscape. Everything to the west was black. The fire had consumed thousands of acres of forest, leaving behind a charcoal wasteland of standing dead trees and ash. The burn area stretched as far as I could see. That my escape route was gone. Even if I could get past the infected at the trailhead, I'd have to hike through miles of unstable burn area where every step could punch through ash into hidden hotspots, where dead trees could fall without warning, where there was no water, no shade, no life. I was well and truly trapped now. I had a visitor. I'd been hearing something moving around the lookout platform for a couple of nights. Scratching sounds, heavy footfalls on the wooden boards. I'd assumed it was a marmot or maybe a porcupine. Then, just after dawn, I looked out the window and saw it. A black bear, big one, probably 300 pounds, standing on its hind legs with its front paws on the platform railing, looking directly at me. Black bears usually avoided humans, but the fires had destroyed their normal territory, disrupted their food sources. This bear was hungry and desperate, and it had smelled my food supply. We looked at each other through the glass. The bear's eyes were brown and empty of anything I could read as emotion or thought, just animal assessment, food or not food, threat or not threat. I banged on the glass. Get out of here, go. The bear dropped to all fours, circled the platform, then stood again and tested the corner posts with its weight. The structure creaked. The bear was evaluating whether it could climb up, break in, get to the food. I grabbed my hatchet, opened the door a crack and shouted again, "Get the fuck out of here." The bear looked at me, didn't leave, just stood there. Staring. I was reaching for my flare gun. I had 6 emergency flares for signaling aircraft when the bear finally dropped back to all fours and ambled off down the trail, but I knew it would be back. Hunger was a powerful motivator, and I was the only food source for miles. Day 80, the bear came back. This time at night. I woke to the sound of wood splintering, grabbed my flashlight and shined it out the window. The bear was attacking one of the platform's corner posts, ripping away chunks of wood with its claws. The structure shuddered. I felt it through the floor. If the bear took out a corner post, the whole platform might collapse. I loaded the flare gun, opened the door, aimed at the bear's mass. I couldn't see well enough in the dark to aim for specific body parts and fired. The flare hit the bear somewhere in the shoulder, exploded in a shower of sparks and burning magnesium. The bear roared. The sound was enormous, echoing off the peaks. Then it fled, crashing down the trail. I checked the corner post with my flashlight. Deep gouges in the wood. Structural integrity compromised. Another attack or two like that and the post might fail. I spent the next day reinforcing the damaged post with rope, wrapping it tight, trying to add support. It was crude engineering, but it might help. The bear came back on day 8, and day 80-6. Each time, I drove it off with a flare. Each time it did more damage. By day 88, I was down to 1 flare, and the bear knew where the food was. Day 90, I made my peace with dying. The food was almost gone. The flares were gone. The bear was going to get in eventually. The smoke was doing permanent damage to my lungs, and I was alone in a glass box at 10,000 feet, with no way out and no help coming. This was it. This was where my story ended. I wrote letters to my family, 2 friends, to anyone who might eventually find this lookout and wonder what happened to Sarah Mitchell, the fire lookout who disappeared during the outbreak of 2024. I wrote about my choices, the survivors I'd turned away, the isolation I'd chosen, the fortress I'd thought would save me. I wrote that I was sorry. Sorry for being selfish. Sorry for thinking I could survive alone. Sorry for not understanding that humans aren't meant to live like this. I put the letters in a waterproof container with my logbook, left them on the table where they'd be easily found. Then I sat on the catwalk, and watched the sun set over the burned landscape, and waited for whatever came next. Day 100, a miracle happened. I was scanning with a binocular still, maintaining my routine, even though there was no point when I saw it. Movement on a distant ridge, but not the shambling movement of the infected. Organized movement, a line of people hiking in formation, maybe 15 or 20 of them. They had packs, they were moving with purpose, and they were heading in my general direction. I watched them all day. They were following ridgelines, avoiding the valley bottoms where the infected clustered. Smart, careful. These were survivors who knew what they were doing by evening. They'd made camp about 6 miles from my position. I could see their small fires. I made a decision. I'd go to them, descend from the lookout, cross the intervening terrain, make contact. Humans, real human beings, a community, a chance at something beyond slow death in isolation. I packed my essential gear, minimal clothing, water filter, knife, fire starter, left everything else that dawn on day 101. I descended the trail for the first time in 90 days. The first half-mile was terrifying. Every shadow might hide infected. Every sound might be them coming, but the trail was clear. Then I smelled it, before I saw it, the smell of rot. At mile 2, I found them. A cluster of infected blocking the trail, maybe 8 of them, standing there swaying slightly, facing random directions. I froze. 30 yards away, they hadn't noticed me yet. Slowly I backed up, trying to be silent, but my boot caught a loose rock. It clattered down the trail. All 8 heads turned toward the sound, toward me. For a moment nobody moved. Then they came, not shambling, running, fast and aggressive. I ran back up the trail, heard them behind me, crashing through the brush, making sounds that weren't quite human. I made it to the lookout, scrambled up onto the platform, looked down. They'd followed me all the way up, were clustered at the base of the posts now, looking up, reaching. I'd led them straight to my sanctuary. Day 105, the infected stayed. They didn't leave, just stood around the base of the lookout, sometimes for hours at a time. 8 of them, trapping me. The survivor group I'd seen moved on. I watched them disappear east into the smoke. My last chance at rescue had passed me by. Day 120, a new fire started, close this time, maybe 3 miles from the lookout. I watched it grow, spread, march toward me. The infected didn't notice, didn't care. Just kept their vigil at the base of my platform. Day 130, the fire reached the base of Desolation Peak. I could see flames now, hear the roar, feel the heat even at 10,000 feet. The infected finally moved, scattered by the approaching fire, wandered off in different directions, but the fire kept coming. Day 135, I accepted I had to run. The fire was going to reach the lookout. Being in a glass box when that happened would be like being in an oven. I grabbed my pack, put in the letters, the log, a water bottle, left everything else, descended the trail through smoke so thick I could barely see, through heat that felt like it would ignite my lungs. The fire chased me down through the burn zone where ash was knee-deep. I made it for miles before I couldn't run anymore, collapsed in the trail, coughing blood, unable to stand. The fire was maybe a half-mile behind me now. I could see the glow through the smoke. This was it. Then I heard voices, real voices, over here. I found someone, hands grabbing me, lifting me, carrying me. I looked up through smoke-burned eyes and saw faces. The survivor group, they'd come back. We're running from the same fire. We've got you, someone said. Hold on, just hold on. They carried me down the mountain, through the smoke and fire, down to the valley where their main camp was. They had food, water, medicine, a whole community of people living together, helping each other. They saved my life. The lookout burned on day 130. I saw the glow from the valley camp, my glass sanctuary consumed by the very fires I'd been hired to prevent. But I was alive, with people, part of something larger than my own survival. And I finally understood what I should have known from the beginning. Survival isn't about finding the highest fortress. It's about finding people who'll carry you down the mountain when you can't walk anymore. If this story made you think about isolation versus community, about watching versus helping, hit that like button. Subscribe for more survival horror that cuts deep. Comment below. Could you survive 200 days in a fire lookout? Stay connected, stay human, and remember, the best view means nothing if you're alone watching it.